The Comfort Women, a fight for justice and honor. A tragic story of war and politics that so far has no ending and no apology more than 70 years later.
I wish the victims of all 13 communities want sincere apology from the Japanese government. However, as you know, Prime Minister Abe would not apologize.
Japan wants to wipe out that chapter of its atrocities, so its image will not be tarnished and they will not be publicly shamed.
A story of Japan's slavery and rape involving hundreds of thousands of women.
We know it's been established that it is the largest government-sponsored industrial mass sexual trafficking of women in modern history. We know that somewhere between 85 to 95% of those women died.
A story about the survivors who want justice, and by bringing their stories to light, it will also help end sex trafficking that is still going on.
They took my clothes off and stuffed the cloth in my mouth and started beating me.
But also a story of hope and coming together.
San Francisco statue marks the 8th Comfort Woman Memorial built in the United States. And this is the first time in history. Yes, this is the first time in history that Korean, Chinese, and Filipino communities, along with victims of all 13 communities, have joined hands to create such a monument.
First of all, a big shout out to San Francisco. Thank you, San Francisco, for hosting this memorial that speaks to a dark history of Asia in World War II that the world needs to know about.
The largest U.S. city to erect a Comfort Women statue was unveiled to honor the hundreds of thousands of women forced into sexual slavery before and during World War II by Japan.
So here is the plaque, language that we labored over many hours, and we tried to convey the universality of the violence against women during wartime must stop. Quote, "Our worst fear is that our painful history during World War II will be forgotten." Former Comfort Women. This monument bears witness to the suffering of hundreds of thousands of women and girls, euphemistically called comfort women, who were sexually enslaved by the Japanese Imperial Armed Forces in 13 Asia-Pacific countries from 1931 to 1945. Most of these women died during their wartime captivity. This dark history was hidden for decades until the 1990s, when the survivors courageously broke the silence. They helped move the world to declare that sexual violence as a strategy of war is a crime against humanity for which governments must be held accountable.
기념비가 싫고 무서우면 일본은 사죄하고 법적인 배상해야 됩니다.
If Japan does not like the memorial, if Japan is afraid of the memorial, Japan must acknowledge and apologize for what they did and make legal compensation.
We were warned early on that we might be up against some backlash, and rightly enough, we got about 1,200 emails and calls and, should we say, encouragement to drop the project.
Hundreds of supporters and media from around the world were there to witness history.
Special thank you to entire Korean community, especially to our elders who gave us a precious $5, $10, $50, $100 donations from their pockets. I want the generation of today to know the pain of what happened. Knowledge is a power. Only by bringing our communities together can we combat this ongoing violence. Together, let us stand as beacons of hope for all the victims of sex trafficking.
I see my daughter, Jade, who's 17 years old, in their eyes. I see my papa, my grandma in their eyes, and in your strength as well, Halmani Lee.
Even Japanese Americans like former Congressman Mike Honda, who spent part of his childhood in a Japanese American internment camp.
It's not about being Asian or not being of another country or anything else. It's about being a human being. This is a human rights issue. And I think that the message that we are sending from the Golden State to the Golden Gate, from the city of San Francisco, is never again will we ever victimize girls and women during times of natural disasters, through times of conflict and war.
We face a lot of pushback from the Japanese government through the Japanese consulate office. They attend all the hearings, all the people from their group attended all our hearings. Altogether, we must have had about 15 public hearings before the supervisors and also before the Arts Commission. At the majority of the hearings they attended, they would voice objections to everything from debating whether there was an apology or that why Japan has been singled out.
I think the first thing I'd like to convey is that the comfort women stories generally propagated in this country are totally false. They are not true. For example, 200,000 people, that's not true. Forcible recruitment, that was not true. And, sex slaves, that is not true.
Mr. Mera, that's not what she said. Are you calling her a liar? Please. Thank you to Miho.
I do want to address some of the members of the audience that came here, though, and spoke to deny what happened. And I say this with a great deal of love and respect, but shame on you. Shame on you. Shame on you for denying what happened, and shame on you for the personal attacks on this woman, Grandma Lee, who had the courage to fly from another side of the world to come here to speak her truth. Amazing. And by the way, I hope that the Japanese government is not behind some of these denials.
And what they did also in Glendale was also a veiled threat to us, because in Glendale, they sued the Glendale government, city and county of Glendale, all the way to the U.S. Supreme Court.
Comfort ladies are nothing more than prostitutes or professional camp followers.
Whether they were considered prostitutes at the time or were forced, to me is a moot argument, because there's no such thing as a willing 14-year-old prostitute.
If there were 200,000 sex slaves, why that story had been hidden for 50 years?
How about the fact that they didn't want to go out into the world while they were still young and announce to everyone that, hey, by the way, I was raped by hundreds of soldiers?
No historical documents have ever been found that the Korean women were forced to be comfort women by Japanese army or government.
The report entitled Subject, Japanese Military's Comfort Woman System by Larry Nix, the Specialist in Asian Affairs, Foreign Affairs, Defense, and Trade Division, dated April 3rd, 2007. That was the basis for H.R. 121, approved by the U.S. House of Representatives.
One of the speakers said, oh, we never heard about it. No, you never heard about it. because the Japanese government chose not to teach its people the reality and the truth of what that imperial army did in the Second World War.
Japanese government entered as an official party, filed an amicus brief, which is the friends of the court, alleging that the memorials must be taken down because it involves the core national interest.
But they continue to fight. In San Francisco's sister city, Osaka, Japan, some officials there have threatened to end the 60-year-old relationship because of the new memorial. This is why, more than 70 years after the war has ended, there's still so much interest and debate. In addition, former Prime Minister Yasuhiro Nakasone started out as a 23-year-old lieutenant during World War II, and in his memoirs, he talks about helping set up the comfort stations and the sex trafficking.
Why there's so many witnesses are out there? Why is this such an issue that's such a long run too? However, they most likely will get tired before we'll get tired, because we are now starting to educate a lot of the Korean schools and a lot of other California textbook. Just in 2017, in September, when they start printing, worked on it for 6 years. If you finally got the comfort women in the history and science, and that was framed in, and it's going to get published.
Here's what we do know. From 1932 to 1945, the Japanese military set up the comfort stations in each country they invaded. The women from those countries were turned into sex slaves. Korea, China, the Philippines, and Indonesia were among the many countries. Japanese military men stood in line, waiting for their turn to have sex. Some of the victims were raped 50 to 60 times a day, and many died.
The horror and the terror, the brutality, the cruelty of what these hundreds of thousands of, we refer to them as women, but they were really young girls and young women, as young as ages 8 and 10, who didn't survive. 87% of the women we are recognizing today died. Very few survived because of the physical horror they endured. And so to remember that we should never forget and never again.
One of the faces is Young Soo Lee, known as Grandma Lee, one of the very few comfort women still alive. When you listen to her story, you can see that even though it was decades ago, in her mind, it could have been yesterday.
남자 형제만 있었어요. 위에 오빠.
In my family, I only had siblings who, I only had brothers. I had one older brother, and then it was me, and then I had 5 younger brothers. So I was the only daughter, and as the only daughter in the family, I was really loved.
She was just a typical teenager, 15 years old, when 2 soldiers spotted her and took her from her home and forced her on a train with the other women. She had no idea why.
So we were boarded a train, and that was my first time riding a train at 16 years old. But I started having the sickness, and I had a severe headache, and I started vomiting. And I think I was the youngest of the 5 girls, so I told other girls that, you know, I'm not going, I want to go home because I have headache, I want to go home. But when I complained, one of the soldiers started hitting me on my head and kicked me, so I lost consciousness. I was really scared, so I did what they told us to do. So they dragged us, and then once the train stopped, we were taken to some building, to a room, and they started beating us on our hands and the sole of the feet, and they got really swollen. And now I think that they did it so that we wouldn't run away. During the first ride in the train, actually that train passed by my house. So I started screaming and yelling, "Mom, Mom." However, it just passed my house, and the soldiers, took me by my hair, and they, hit my head against other girls' head, threatening to kill me.
She was then put on a Navy ship where the abuse continued.
We were taken to a city called Dalian, and there was a port where 11 Japanese Navy ships were parked, and we were taken to the last ship with 300 Japanese Navy. Japanese military at the time did not have an air force, but they had Navy, and they made this, the five of these young girls aboard with those 300 soldiers.
Grandma Lee won't talk about the actual sexual attacks, still too painful. But it wasn't the only torture she endured.
And we were taken to a house with a triangle-shaped roof, and there was a big room in the house, and there were 10 ladies sitting there. There was a soldier standing in front of one of those rooms and motioned me to go in. I was scared. I didn't want to go in that room. So I started begging, even though I didn't do anything wrong. And he grabbed me by my hair and put me on a chair in front of the desk and made me put my both hands on the top of the desktop, and took some lines from somewhere and put those lines around my wrists, one here and another one here, and saying that I'm going to kill this Korean. And I started begging again, but then he ran something, and I believe it was electric shock. And I had so much shock that I think I screamed from the at the top of my lung, "Mom!" And I don't even remember if I made a sound or not, but I fainted. This is not even a detailed testimony. I have not told everything I needed to say, and I was summarizing my story here and there. However, I want to ask, why did I have to forced into a soldier's room? Why did I have to go through those torture and electric torture because I refused to go in those rooms? I still am suffering from the pain.
After the war ended, she was finally able to come home in 1946, but it was not the homecoming she was expecting.
When I came home, I was in bad shape. So my mom was so shocked to see me. She thought I was a ghost. And she believed that I was a ghost, that she put fire on a bunch of straw and tried to kick me out of the house, thinking that I was a ghost. My mom went a little crazy at the shock. This is the pain and suffering they caused me.
Does she hate the Japanese?
I hate the crime they committed, but I don't hate people. Why do you think I had to struggle for 26 years demanding official apology and legal compensation? If you committed a crime, you have to be punished for it. There is a reason why I don't hate them. It is because of the next generation who are growing up, our children. That is the reason. I hope the young people of both countries will become friends.
This isn't the life you asked for or wanted, but you're an inspiration to so many people. If you could snap your fingers and go back and act like it never happened, would you do that? Or are you comfortable with the life that you've lived and what you've been able to accomplish
Right now, I am very active, and I go and meet so many people around the globe. So what happened in the past is what happened, and I don't cling to those memories only, because so many people around the world give me the energy and give me the laughter and make me happy. I am only very grateful for the people.
The question, will Japan officially apologize before the last of the comfort women is dead?
What's really important is the education. Yes, certainly we would want the apology, like the Japanese Americans wanted the apology from the U.S. government. So we were successful because of people like my father, that resulted in the Civil Liberties Act of 1988 that was signed by President Reagan, a Republican, right? So that can happen. And I don't know what it's going to take. Hopefully this type of media education will help to change people's hearts and minds.
It's amazing to me, in one way, that Japan has refused to apologize. I mean, it's not just that they've refused to apologize. They basically say this didn't happen. I mean, there was a letter in the Chronicle that said, you're just looking at one side. It's a two-sided issue. Well, what's the other side? And, they also deny that the massacre in Nanjing happened. In 1937, 300,000 people were killed in 6 weeks, and they say that never happened. I mean, this is very dangerous to deny history.
I think it's a moving target. Just look at the way Japan is now reacting or responding to the Comfort Women Memorial. For the longest time, they allege it's a geopolitical issue and accuse those of us who are, have ethnic origins in China or Korea of playing geopolitical game and doing this to gain their own ethnic countries an advantage. But now if you look recently, as a result of the San Francisco Comfort Women Memorial, they're changing the strategy. They're saying that matter is so complicated, it is very difficult, and there's so many factors involved. It's not all sides, there's not just one side, they're all sides.
Well, it depends on the countries of the world. If the United States demands it, it might happen.
Until then, more memorials will go up to honor the women around the world.
We continue to honor the suffering of our elders and ancestors as motivation for our better future. As part of our global mission, an identical monument will be placed in Seoul, Korea next year. Yes, Seoul, Korea next year. And all plans are being made for replicas to build in Shanghai, China, the Philippines, and Vietnam.
A lot of grandmas are in heaven now, and I think our memorial gave them some peace, and their souls can rest in peace. I think a lot of comfort women who are around the world, there are only 60-some left, are finding more peaceful. They understand what this is, and it means a lot to them. So when I look at the memorial, I think of them. I think of the comfort women of the past. I think of the comfort women of the present. And I hope that there will no longer be any comfort women of the future.